He is called Benjamin, better known as Sargon of Akkad.
Is a terrible, evil, right-wing, misogynist, racist, Islamophobic troll. He's not funny. He's not charming. I can't even read the whole article.
It is a fucking feminist system that's doing this!
Cock and balls. The Nazis were absolutely socialist. It's not just insulting, it's just politically illiterate. Britain's involvement in the slave trade is one of the most proud accomplishments of British history. Honestly, this is just such bollocks. But if I don't, I'm going to get Kevin Logan breathing down my neck. I'm going to get Kevin Logan breathing down my neck. Kevin Logan breathing down my neck.
Kevin Logan breathing down my neck.
Hello there everybody and welcome to episode 50. Yes, fucking 50, can you believe it? We're halfway to the ton, people. Let's fucking keep it going. Anyways, welcome to episode 50 of The Descent of Man-osphere. The series where I take you through the ways in which the Man-osphere and its utterly disgusting, reprehensible douchebag inhabitants are trying to reverse human evolution and drag us all back into the fucking sea. And today we're dealing with a certain Sargon of Akkad. Never fucking heard of him. Don't be stupid. You have done tons of videos on Sargon. Your poor attempts to pretend you do not know him are pathetic. Alright, Rory Cats, I'm just doing a bit of whimsical business for the episode, man. You are a fucking buzzkill sometimes, you little ginger dickhead. Anyways, yes, obviously I've heard of him, Sargon of Akkad, real name Carl Benjamin. And that's obviously not doxing. It's very well known that Carl is Carl. And it seemed only appropriate that as this was a milestone, episode 50, that I would do it about Sargon of Akkad. Even though I'd said that I would never do this episode because I'd covered Carl enough on the channel and all the rest of it, I was only ever kidding myself, really, wasn't I? This was obviously going to have to happen at some point, so why not now? And as my ginger sidekick rather rudely fucking pointed out, I've done, quite a few videos on Carl in the past, and indeed, we've done 1,000,001 fucking hangouts and stuff together over the course of the last 3 fucking years now. I mean, all the way from a 4-hour epic hangout, the very first one we did, all the way through to quite recently. We were both obviously involved in the infamous Sargon versus Richard Spencer debate on the Andy Warski channel. Like I say, we've got some history, me and Carl. It's been emotional. But anyways, before we get into the actual content, a couple of points of order before we start, right? Firstly, and I think this is absolutely worth pointing out, okay? I don't hate Carl, okay? This is something that I get from his fanboys all the fucking time, that I just hate him. I don't hate him, okay? I don't hate him at all. We have very, very fucking significant disagreements. And there's heated moments and all the rest of it, but it's not hatred, okay? This video is going to be very fucking harsh on Carl. And I make absolutely no apologies for that whatsoever, okay? That's just what this series is. But just know that it doesn't come from a place of fucking hatred, okay? And like I said, me and Carl have quite a bit of history here on the tubes. So I feel like I've covered enough of his shit where people who are fans of my stuff will generally know who he is. So I'm going to allow myself to be a little bit more self-indulgent with this episode than I would in others. And there are going to be 2 overarching points to that. Firstly, even though Carl claims to be on the left, he's in fact what I've termed the basic bitch internet conservative. He's not on the left at all, he's a right-wing arsehole. He's a fucking Tory, okay? And has even recently strayed into the alt-light territory and has started referring to himself as a civic nationalist. What a wanker! And the second point is that even though Carl himself is not alt-right, he has been more than happy to pander to the fashy scum in order to, make money and get extra subscribers, views, that sort of thing. It's all very, very sad. But like I said, a little bit later in the episode I'm going to allow myself to get a little bit self-indulgent with that and return to those 2 points in a little bit more depth. But I just wanted you to bear those 2 in mind throughout the episode because they are recurring themes. But anyways, let's start at the start, so to speak. Carl rose to a certain amount of prominence as one of the leaders of the hate movement known as Gamergate. And now I've done 1,000,001 videos on Gamergate, so if you want to go check those out on my channel, they're all there. My feelings on the topic are pretty well established at this point. But anyways, Carl's obsession, and indeed Gamergate's obsession, was with one woman in particular.
Anita Sarkeesian. Anita Sarkeesian. Thing Anita Sarkeesian. You've got, Sarkeesian. Anita Sarkeesian. Getting real tired of your shit, Anita.
Yes, the game critic and feminist Anita Sarkeesian, who they bullied and harassed for fucking years, thus making her famous, which must itself be one of the most amazing examples of spectacular counterproductivity that's ever fucking existed. Well done, guys! But I was glad to see that years after the main sort of hate storm of Gamergate had passed, that Anita Sarkeesian was able to unleash a little bit of steam on Carl when at VidCon 2017 he and his fucking goon squad of slack-jawed simpletons decided to try and be sort of intimidatory by going and purposefully sitting in the very front fucking row, basically letting her know that he was there and they were there, a panel she was doing, and so she got the opportunity to unleash upon him, and she did a little bit.
Who are making these dumbass videos that just say the same shit over and over again. And like, I hate to give you attention because you're a garbage human.
Yes, Anita. Yes, he fucking is. Oh, God, that was fun. And speaking of what a garbage human being Carl is, especially to women, now it's time for... Yes, it's the occasional bit about Lacey Green, which isn't really occasional. It's very much a sham title for a sham intellectual. Anyways, Sargon has had something of a checkered history with Lacey, by which I mean he hated her fucking guts until she started spouting the exact kind of fucking worthless bile that he does, and now he loves her. Interesting. And so we're going to take a look at the pathetic, shameless fucking rewriting of history that Carl has done in regards to his change of heart about Lacey. So firstly, after Lacey supposedly took the red pill, Carl said this about her.
Now, I'm someone who's somewhat of a fan of Lacey Green. I've watched a lot of her videos, and I've enjoyed many of them. But she never struck me as a bad person. She wasn't like Anita Sarkeesian. Lacey, as far as I can tell, hasn't been dishonest.
Well, that's a fucking lie, isn't it, Carl?
Fucking disgusting. Absolutely disgusting. We all know that you don't think this man was a human being, Lacey. Oh, get his way. Oh, right, because people trying to fulfill their desires is them getting their way, and it's evil and disgusting and horrible, and it's directly something women should be afraid of. You are a vile propagandist, Lacey Green.
So he definitely didn't think that she was a bad person or dishonest in any way, except that she was a disgusting and vile propagandist. Yes, how very, very dishonest of you, Carl. Oh yeah, and there's also this fucking gem.
It's crazy. This is a disease of the modern age. You are responsible for perpetuating it by disenfranchising these poor fucking guys who don't have any options left. When someone takes the option of absolute, insanely last resort, you have to wonder what kind of system is producing them. And I tell you what, Lacey, it is a fucking feminist system that's doing this.
Yes, that would be Carl blaming Lacey for the murders committed by Elliot Rodger. I mean, what the fuck? I mean, so much for personal responsibility, eh, Carl? Also, Lacey, for all of the things you think the feminist community have done and said about you, we've never blamed you for fucking murders, whereas Sargon fucking has. But it's all cool now because, you know, they kissed and made up at VidCon, so it's all good, and it's totally not Lacey selling herself out to those who bullied her for years in order to bilk money and fame from a group of rabid scum who victimised her and her friends. No, it's obviously not about that, no, it's about principles. Obviously. But anyways, moving on. Although sticking very much with the theme of Carl pretending to care about women but only when it suits him, now it's time for... Yes, it's the inevitable bit about rape. And for Carl's inevitable bit about rape, I'd also like to tie in a very synoptic fashion, another theme that runs throughout Carl's work, that being his dislike and distrust of the Muslims. Now this manifests itself in many different ways. Most disgustingly, I would suggest, is that Carl tries really hard to appear to care about the victims of rape and sexual assault that's been committed by migrants, mainly Muslim migrants, in Europe.
The continuing Islamization of Sweden and the rape culture it is producing. As I said, the German police believe that it was Taharush that was committed in Cologne and other cities in the new year by Arab and North African men that led to the hundreds of police complaints and sexual assaults and rapes in the following weeks. Scandinavia has a problem. And frankly, Sweden is the canary in the coal mine. Burying your head in the sand and saying, no, it's just that we have really broad rape laws that make everything rape, is a narrative you and your media are clinging to.
Yeah, Carl really wants you to think that he cares about the victims of rape and sexual assault. But Carl, we can tell that's a load of old shit when we take a look at the way in which you talk about rape and sexual assault, when the people being accused aren't Muslims.
Progressive tone policing of, you said something naughty 5 years ago. I think eventually there will be so many people who have fallen foul of this that it will just lose its power. And I think the same thing's happening with, say, unfounded allegations of sexual assault, a la the Me Too movement.
Every Western nation does this, with state funding in countries like Britain and Norway providing dozens of rape crisis centres at taxpayer expense, staffed by feminist activists agitating on the subject. I've come to the conclusion that Lawrence Krauss did nothing wrong. You know, I mean, there is a difference between like a Twitter accusation of rape and a credible accusation of rape. One of these involves going on social media, and the other involves going to the police. Honestly, if someone makes an accusation of rape or anything really by Twitter, they're lying.
Anyone who takes to Twitter to make a sexual assault allegation is, in my opinion, lying.
So you told female MP Jess Phillips.
Yep.
Everyone should know this by now. I just want to make absolutely sure.
Everyone should know. It's in the newspapers, so you probably do know.
Someone who was herself a victim of sexual assault. And it's in response to a campaign to try to fight online harassment, and you saw fit to tweet at her, to say to her, I wouldn't even rape you.
Yep. And do you understand why your moral outrage about that is something I just don't care about?
Yeah, Carl, you don't give a shit about the victims of rape and sexual assault, okay? You just want to bash Muslims. And that can be seen in the way in which you're happy to listen and believe when the person being accused is a Muslim, but when the person being accused isn't a Muslim, you do the whole skepticism to the point of denialism thing. Sargon, you are a dishonest rape apologist, and an Islamophobic bigot to boot. It's fucking disgusting. But anyways, with all of that unpleasantness dealt with and out of the way, now it's time for some self-indulgent political spectrum wankery from me. Because I've been telling Carl for the past 3 fucking years now what a right-wing twat he is. So I'm going to try and sort of elaborate on that a little bit for you all. Now, I don't say all of this because I think that, being right-wing is like the most evil thing ever. It's just that Carl is so fundamentally dishonest about it that I feel I have to point these things out. So let's take a look, shall we? Firstly, Carl rather pretentiously calls himself a classical liberal.
So I tend to use the term classical liberal. Classical liberal. I say the word classical liberal. This is why we tend to use the label classical liberal.
Yeah, Carl, in the modern era, right, classical liberal means conservative. That's what that fucking is, okay? Look, yes, you were a liberal 300 fucking years ago. Well done to you, right? And that's the thing, you want to go back to a time when liberalism was like this classical liberal thing. That's 3 centuries ago, mate. And you have the temerity to call other people regressive. What the fuck? And the fact that Carl calls himself a regressive liberal and holds to this ridiculous fucking old philosophy is because he has this really weird obsession with old dead philosophers.
You're a fucking tyrant. And I now, as Locke describes, have a moral duty. Aristotle considered the Northern Europeans to be subnormal.
I mean, this is what On Liberty is almost all about when John Stuart Mill's time.
And so the choosing of a representative, while Rousseau was not a fan of this at all,
there is no legitimate mandate to try and violently overthrow a Western democracy.
However, these people do not live in a Western democracy. Who was it? Was it Locke or Hobbes that said that became a duty?
Now, whilst it's good to be educated about old philosophies and about the, historical significance of old philosophers and stuff, right? It's not really relevant to the modern world, is it, Carl? You even went into that debate with Richard Spencer and started waffling on about John Locke. I mean, what the fuck? That's not relevant to anything that was being discussed. Look, Carl, John Locke can suck my sweaty fucking arsehole, okay? You handed a massive debating score to Richard Nazi fuck Spencer because you started waffling on about insanely irrelevant fucking bullshit, making yourself look a twat and by comparison making him look fucking good. If you have a point to make or a principle to state, then fucking do so. But no one gives a fuck that some old dead cunt said it at fucking ages ago, right? John Locke's been dead 3 fucking centuries, mate. Bring up something a little bit more fucking contemporary. Plus, it's just fucking pretentious bullshit on your part anyway, so that your fans will think, oh, he's really educated, therefore the things he says must be true. It's just fucking bullshit. But anyways, having touched upon there Carl's fucking political illiteracy, that can be seen rather clearly in the things that Carl thinks are far left.
By the 19th of September, even far-left publication Vox magazine...
Yeah, you can't get me on Twitter because Jack Dorsey is part of the Silicon Valley far-leftists.
Far-left outlets like The Guardian, and I can imagine that's why the socialists at The Independent hate him so much.
And when you look at the culture that Google and YouTube are swimming in, the far-left, incredibly regressive culture...
where we want to enjoy our freedom of speech, and we have far-leftists who control Google, who probably want to shut us down.
So yeah, Carl's so far to the fucking right that he even thinks that massive fucking capitalist megacorporation, Google, is run by the far left. Yeah, the phrase too far gone might be quite appropriate there, I think. Now, Sargon's apologists will often cite certain things that Carl claims to support, like, abortion or whatever, in order to try and establish his liberal credentials. But the thing is, right, that argument doesn't hold any fucking water anymore because Carl has consistently supported political parties and candidates who oppose those fucking things.
And everyone's accusing her of exploiting the Paris shooting to boost her campaign. I don't think she needs to exploit it, given that that's one of the main thrusts of her campaign. She is actually promising to do something about these terror attacks. Le Pen, who has been campaigning on a hardline anti-EU, anti-immigration platform, urged the socialist government to carry out immediate measures that are included in her campaign manifesto. As with all counterculture politicians, Wilders received much negative press, and his views are presented in the usual distorted, heavily biased manner.
There's a very real chance that we could stay in the single market at this point.
Honestly, that's why I want Theresa May to win. She's been hardline on it. Let's have a laugh. I go to Donald Trump's Twitter account, and the only line in the description is, the 45th President of the United States. And it cheers me right up. But this is why I'm just fully on the Rees-Mogg train. Just like, no, he's the, Farage is a good wingman. Rees-Mogg is the leader. Go.
Yes, for the past few years now, he has consistently supported all of the right-wing candidates, all of the right-wing parties, right? And often the most right-wing possibility within that grouping even, right? And supported basically no one on the left. In fact, all he's done is pour scorn on people like Bernie Sanders and Jeremy Corbyn and the like. So if all you are is on the left in theory, Carl, then you're not actually on the fucking left, are you? You can't support all of these right-wing fuckers and then claim that you're not on the right. That's not really how it fucking works, is it? Especially when you spend all of your fucking time just attacking the left.
I'm down with anything that's going to cause a meltdown in the left at this point. The left is total cancer. Thirds of
80%
teachers.
80% of professors are left.
And not just left wing, but like Corbyn supporters. And don't get me started on Corbyn. So, social justice warriors, the social justice warriors. You can see that the SJWs have fully taken over Hollywood to remove all this social justice cancer. Social justice has just taken over my fucking country. Social justice warriors.
Social justice warrior.
The social justice warriors. Social justice warriors. So yeah, God, the left is just a danger to our civilization at this point. I mean, if you can't trust the left. This is why we have a problem with the regressive left. The regressive left in the media. With the regressive left, honestly, at this point, I'm in full-on culture warrior mode against the left. They have to be stopped.
And in addition to all of his attacks on the left, there is his constant cocksuckery of the right.
Capitalism is just saving the world at the moment in almost every regard.
Sargon, thank you so much for taking the time today.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on. And the feeling's mutual. I've followed your work for years as well. And, there are small differences in ideology that we have and whatnot, but generally, I think you've done a fantastic job of opposing the nonsense that's coming out of the progressive left at the moment.
I don't think Corbyn's actually going to achieve office. Thank fuck. This is a guy in an outfit. It's not. I mean, there are some transgender people who really you couldn't tell. I love when he's going on the SJWs and when he's talking about Marxism and things like this. These are the important things that he does. And he is a brilliant man. I mean, it annoys me watching people trying to undermine him because they don't understand him. It's like, he is a brilliant man. There's no getting around it. If you don't think he is, then you are being wildly arrogant, I think. But, I mean, yeah, I just don't see the atheists need to spend any time going against Peterson. Because this is one of those issues in which the right wing, as an entire side, really has my sympathy. They really do. I fucking hate the extreme left identity politics.
I would rather go back to a time when we weren't being persecuted for being white.
Yeah, he's spouted so much right-wing shit over the years that it's actually almost impressive that he has the temerity to even claim not to be on the right. Especially with his obsession with the imagined demon of every basic bitch internet conservative out there.
Enforcing political correctness on the population, and because of political correctness. Political correctness. Political correctness. Political correctness. Political correctness. Political correctness.
Ah yes, political correctness. The overblown, hysterical fucking demon of every Sargonite basic bitch out there. And of course that's in addition to this kind of fucking drivel.
Of course they are. Of course they've been radicalised in the universities. And, I mean, I don't want to use the term infiltration or subversion, but it's looking very much like it could be considered to be an ideological infiltration of universities.
The SJWs have had to infiltrate and deform the systems from within. I do think they're not necessarily learning about Marxism, and I do think they are being taught to be Marxists.
There seems to be a nascent socialist revolution brewing on our universities.
Yes, damn that nascent socialist revolution on university campuses, which is totally definitely fucking real, by the way. Anyways, that reminds me of my favourite piece of Carl fuckery ever, which was the petition to suspend social justice courses on university campuses, which was just amazing because it was just addressed to universities in general. That was never going anywhere. Yeah, that was the best he could fucking muster in terms of activism, and it doesn't even reach the level of being slacktivism. It's fucking nothing. And surprise, surprise, it achieved fuck all. Just as I imagine this liberalist fucking cringe fest is going to. And by the way, the liberalist is this new thing he's got where I'm not entirely sure what the fuck it actually is. Like, it's sort of political activism or something.
A gang of pretentious cunts.
And it's going nowhere because it's nothing. Carl, you have to actually eventually take like a stand on something and try and do something in order to be an activist, rather than just, saying free speech as if that's going to achieve anything. But anyways, back to Carl being a basic bitch internet conservative. Yes, now a recent addition to the plethora of talking points of the BBIC would be their constant references to a certain South American nation.
I will be discussing events that took place in Venezuela. Let's just look towards Venezuela.
Oh yes, Carl is forever bringing up the nation of Venezuela, regardless of whether it's actually fucking relevant or not. I mean, seriously, right? I kid you not, I tuned into part of Carl's Brexit night broadcast, like he did a live stream thing, which I appeared on many hours later, which was covered in the Brexit episode of this series, in fact. But several hours before that, right? I tuned in, and of course they were talking about Venezuela, because of course Venezuela is massively relevant to the decision of the people of Britain as to whether to leave the European Union or not. I mean, of course, why wouldn't they be talking about fucking Venezuela? And it is through Carl's obsession with Venezuela and socialism that we sort of transition into point two, that being Carl pandering to the far right. And that pandering can be seen by the way he goes on about communism all the fucking time.
I'm sick of you fucking communists. The description explains that feminist economics is a way of radically reconceptualizing and reorienting the study of economics in ways that are more transformative for women. They mean communism. Communists. bunch of fucking communists and communists. A bunch of communists. And this is the thing, leftist just means Marxist. That's all it really means. We need to focus on the real threat of Marxism and cultural Marxism. Totally agree. They call for all of this cultural Marxist stuff. Cultural Marxism. The liberals today aren't liberals, they're basically socialists. Yeah. The gender communists. But feminist gender communism... It's like, Jeremy! For fuck's sake! Just stop. There are limits to everything, you fucking commie. John McDonnell is a full-fledged communist.
Yeah, Carl, if in response to people talking about fascism, you divert the conversation to communism, you're a fucking right-wing prick, okay? Look, communism isn't really relevant to much of the modern world. There really aren't that many Marxists actually around, because much like there aren't many Lockean liberals around, because it's a fucking dead piece of old philosophy which has been superseded by much more modern things, because Locke was writing about a world that doesn't fucking exist anymore. The same is true with Marx, okay? It's very outdated. Things have progressed enormously since then. And ultimately, Carl's pandering to the far right can be seen in the fact that he parrots so many of their fucking talking points.
I'm really reluctant to call anyone a Nazi. I think that's a pointless label. Like there are people like I guess like moderate alt-right people. No, I don't think Hitler was sadistic. Okay, I don't think Adolf Hitler was a sadistic man.
Why would it be that some people on the left would want to complicate the conversation we have on Islam?
Good question. The answer is probably white guilt. But once they're in, now we're in the position. I mean, our hands are, well, I mean, obviously no one wants to do anything that's nasty. So, I mean, my personal, I would maybe provide incentives, financial incentives to, you know, expatriate or something like that. What do I think of Jared Taylor suing Twitter? Well, I dislike Twitter more than I dislike Jared Taylor. Almost every single modern good that we hold to be a liberal principle comes out of white European civilization.
Who was just coming out with hypocrisy about radical inclusion, and Spencer said, well, what about for Israel? And that, I mean, that was a rather amusing moment as well.
Well, yeah, they're never going to argue for diversity for Israel, are they?
Carl, you claim to like oppose the far right, to oppose the alt-right, but if all you do is parrot their shit, and in response to, you know, the things you disagree with them, you just give sort of vague, generalised, philosophical, fucking theoretical opposition to them, then you're not actually really opposing them in any real sense at all. In fact, you aid and abet their rise because you give them platforms and you make them look good because you're shit at debating. And you know you're shit at debating, and yet you still continue to try, and you lose every fucking time, even though that's not really the point of debate. This isn't really like a formal debate, it's more of a sort of loose discussion, and you get fucked over every time and make the far right look good. So please stop. Also, Carl, don't think it has slipped my notice that when it comes to you wittering on about free speech, and oh how fuck, this guy loves going on and on about free speech, even though as a supposed free speech absolutist he clearly doesn't actually understand what the fuck free speech is. He does go on about it all the fucking time.
As part of their ongoing crusade against freedom of speech, understanding that freedom of speech in Britain was under direct assault, it's a threat to free speech.
Free speech.
Arguing for free speech. To free speech. People defenders of free speech. The thing with free speech is...
Yes, but for all the constant fucking jibber-jabber going on about free speech, it has been noted, by myself included, that you rarely defend anyone's free speech but that of fasci scum, okay? That's very telling. It seems to me like all too often you've tried to soft sell the far right to a more moderate audience, which is why Richard Spencer called you a very easy in to the alt-right, because that's precisely what you have been. You have been their useful idiot for a long time. Anyways, let's wrap up, shall we? Because I am so unbelievably fucking done with Carl at this point. Now, due to time constraints, I had to cut a rather large segment at the end of this episode, which was a look at a video of his titled An Honest Look at the Alt-Right, which wasn't an actual honest look at the alt-right at all from Carl. It was basically him soft-selling the alt-right's bullshit. Anyway, I had to cut that out because of time. So what I'll do is I'll put up that video as like a deleted scene bonus episode of this series a day or two after I release this video. But anyways, let's get to the segment of the show where I go through a long list, although it's most assuredly not an exhaustive list, of the things that I didn't cover that Carl also does that are fucking disgusting. Firstly, I didn't have time to get to Carl's questionable financial dealings with regards to the video game that he didn't produce, even though his fans had given him money to produce it. And of course, this was at the same time as he was criticising Anita Sarkeesian for not producing her video series with the money that her fans had given to her. The difference being, of course, that Sarkeesian has subsequently finished her video series, but I still don't see a game coming from Carl. It's almost like the leaders of Gamergate were all hypocritical arseholes or something. Speaking of which, I didn't get the chance to focus on Carl's friendship with Milo, which is especially interesting given Carl's supposed concern about Muslims raping children in England, considering that Milo advocated for middle-aged men to be able to fuck children, something Carl barely saw fit to even mention on his channel. Again, in Carl's world, it's bad if Muslims do it, but if they're not Muslims, yeah, never mind, I guess. I also didn't get a chance to tease Carl for his patronage of Swindon's massage parlours. And speaking of fat bastards who may or may not have used sex workers, I have to say for legal reasons, Donald Trump. Yes, even though it was mentioned a couple of times in the episode, it's worth reiterating that Carl supports Donald Trump. Yes, he's one of the few people in the world who actually likes Donald Trump. What a fucking turd. I didn't get around to mentioning his habit of gaslighting opponents by telling them that they don't even understand their own ideology. He's done this to people across the political spectrum. He's done it to basically everyone apart from his own little group. He's done it to libertarians, the alt-right, socialists, anarchists, communists. It's a really, really low tactic, the very hallmark of the pseudo-intellectual. I only briefly touched on it in the episode, but if you want to see a physical manifestation of cringe, go and check out The Liberalists, Carl's new pile of shite attempting to masquerade as political activism. It's so fucking embarrassing. I also didn't have time to get to the recent shit with him and Antifa at King's College London, but suffice it to say, as with much of Carl's shit, it was all very underwhelming. And of course there was his triumphant pride in having captured their Antifa flag. He even has it behind him in some of his recent videos. It's just like, yeah, well done, Carl. You stole a flag off some 18-year-olds. What a monumental victory. Jesus fucking Christ. Also, doesn't that go against your whole supposed love of private property rights and all of that? Oh, but just like everything else, every other supposed principle you have, you can break it whenever it suits. Then there are his repeated claims to be 1/4 black in terms of his racial heritage, claims that even he himself has contradicted on occasion. So, I mean, I really don't know what the fuck to believe there. I don't know what's true at this point. And finally, the most annoying aspect of Carl's entire shtick is that for all of the complaining he does about identity politics, and by fuck does he constantly complain about identity politics, but for all of that, his entire fucking channel is identity politics for straight white men. His entire act is aimed at soothing the fragile egos of man-baby twats on the internet who are scared because the world is changing and they don't like it. Well, you know what, guys? Grow the fuck up, okay? Because Carl isn't going to save you. Mainly because he isn't even fucking trying to. Oh sure, he wants you to think he cares about you, but he, just like all the other leaders of Gamergate, is just looking to ride the hate-fueled gravy train for as long as possible, taking advantage of your pain. And that's ultimately one of the most disgusting aspects of what Carl does. It's the fact that he takes advantage of those he professes to fight for. It's fucking disgusting. With all of that said, done and out of the way, there's just one thing left for me to say. Carl Benjamin, aka Sargon of Akkad, go fuck yourself.
Here come on flat top, he come grooving up slowly. He got juju eyeball, he won holy roller. He got hair down below his knee. Got to be a joker, he just So come together